So, I'm going to go over how I made my project step by step and help you guys understand how you can do a similar process. Yours does not have to look like mine. We're going to go over the actual requirements at the end. Let's start with where I started, which was doing some research. I use Pinterest for this. Pinterest is a free app that you can have on your phone or on your computer. You can even use your Google account from school to have your login so that it's attached to what we're doing here in class. But I collected images that I thought would be fun to draw. Um, I did some of this collecting after I tried drawing a more realistic style, and it just was not coming together for me. But I wanted to show you a sample of the kind of images that I constantly referred to for backgrounds, for character design, for emotions, and that sort of thing, body language. All of this at some point informed my decisions that went into my project. So, as far as character design, you can see on the far left here, I tried a more realistic style. I was trying to make a version of myself. And it was okay, but I didn't really like it and I wasn't really comfortable with it. So I ditched that. And then I moved to something that was a little more cutie pie, and that worked better for me. I was trying to make characters of myself and my best friend. I think that mine actually turned out a little bit better than hers. But overall, by the time I got to the actual project, I'd worked most of this out. So then I had to figure out my layout. Now, these are sketches like you did in the last unit. So the idea here is that you are putting together what this strip will be. You need at least 3 panels. So I start with, I love The Walking Dead. My friend is like, me too, but it's so violent. Then I have a close up of her and a diagonal panel. I did this because I like that layout a little bit better. I feel like it breaks up the space in a way that's a little more interesting. So she puts, it's a good thing we don't live in a story like that. And then what I want to have is a street view of people that are worn out, they feel sick, or maybe they're living on the street. I want us to move through a universe that, in some ways, is similar to The Walking Dead, because 2020 is really that harsh and that's stressful. So, I'm going to go through step by step how I actually started this. So, the first thing I did was to come in a couple of centimeters from the edges of my paper and in the panels in between so that there's an actual space there. I find that this looks better with comics and cartoons, manga, that sort of thing. So that's where I started. I used a ruler and measured all around the outside about 2 centimeters, and then I came back and did a similar thing through the middle. And then I come back and make the diagonal as well with a space between the left and the right. So here we have myself and my friend, and we're going to be sitting on the couch. So I drew us first, but I also wanted to show where the TV was going to be. So that's what I have here so far. I did some research about where they would be, what their body position might look like. This is a very rough sketch that I'm going to go over with watercolor and with ink. You can use watercolor if you have access to it. I did not give you any, so I'm not expecting you to do that. So then I added where this is going to be, where the text is. I prefer this type of bubble. You can use a different kind, whatever works for you. I added text to show that there was something going on the TV. And then I also used a vanishing point in the back for the actual room itself. The couch doesn't quite line up the way it should. That's a place where I messed up, but that's okay. If that happens to you on yours, you only need 1 panel that uses linear perspective correctly. And linear perspective, if you remember, is when you use a vanishing point or points. So here I moved into the second panel. I wanted to make her bigger to fill up that space a little more. I don't actually complete the shape of the text bubble. That way it fits again into that space just a little bit better. That panel went really quickly for me. And then I wanted to start the bottom with myself and my best friend. We would be walking down the street. And so I felt like in order to understand the proportions that I needed for the buildings, I had to draw us first. Once I've done that, I can start drawing the building fronts. So I approximated how big would these doors be if we actually walked up to them. This doesn't have to be completely precise because let's face it, It's a cartoon. It doesn't need to have perfect proportions. In fact, many of them do not on purpose. So I drew the fronts of the buildings, and then I had my vanishing points and I drew my lines to them, which you can see in close-ups here. Now, one of my lines here is a little bit off. Actually, two of them are a little bit off here, here and here. I fixed that a little bit as I go, but you can see how the sidewalk lines, the stairs, the buildings at their side, they're using that same vanishing point, which I put towards the middle. Here's the same thing, except it's the right half of the picture. You can see again, it's the sidewalk, it's the building, at least at its side. It's also the entryway to that building that we're looking at that assures us it's open, even though that's going to be a wooden board that's put all over the window. So I started off with watercolor. Now, watercolor can look really sloppy until you clean it up. So if I had just judged my work based on this step, I would have been really disappointed in it. But having worked with ink and watercolor before, I know that this will get cleaned up as I go. If you are planning on inking with something like color pencil, keep in mind that color pencil oftentimes has wax in it, and it may actually be easier to ink it and then color it rather than in the process that I'm doing here. So if you're using markers or ink, you do want to put those lines in before you do the coloring. So this is me adding some shadows and some deeper tones to some of it before I ink. Here's what happened when I inked it. Now, you might notice that there was some issues here. I accidentally spread some of that watercolor this way. It spread here as well. It got on my hand, and that's what happens. I pretty much had to leave it alone. There wasn't a whole lot I could do about that. And as we learned last time, sometimes you just have to leave that stuff alone. Now, if you have a white marker and you want to go over that, that's fine. I'm not going to be upset with you for that. I also went back and I erased pencil marks so that whatever was still showing, I continued erasing as I found those things. Here I am watercoloring my friend in the second panel. That didn't take very long. It's a very simple panel. You'll notice there's more detail in the background on the first panel than there is on the second. This is common with comics because if it's a close-up of the person, you don't want to muddle that up with a lot of details behind them. So that has less detail than the first one, but more details on her. So then I started coloring the bottom part. This took me a while because there were lots of little things that needed to have different colors. So you'll see I took a while on it. Then I started adding some ink and I realized there were some parts I missed with the colors. So you'll see some of those get added as well. So here's my final product. And on the left, here is what I need yours to have. You need to have accurate linear perspective in at least one panel. And for me, that is this one here. Accurate overlap, position, size, and detail change. I can also find that in the final panel, but it does in parts work on the top panel as well. On the left side, I have an overlap of the TV to the people, and then from the people to the couch, and the couch back to that room. So all of those things are overlap and position. Size and detail change happens between the buildings in the front on the bottom panel and the ones in the back. Those are farther away, so I didn't have details on them. There's a consistent style in characters and backgrounds. I'm not going to be super picky about this one, especially cartooning is not something I'm particularly good at. What I want to see though is that you have a style you're aiming for. So if you're doing a cutie pie thing like this, you probably shouldn't have a super dramatic, really realistic background. Those two things don't really work well together. So just think about the overall style. Do some research, find some things you can base yours on. You need to have clean edges. That's just how this style is. Now you can do those clean edges in color pencil, you can do them in ink, you can do them in markers. Any of those are fine. I would not recommend pencil. Pencil is just not something that works well with this style. You can start with pencil, but you need to end with something else. Text and a clear narrative. I need to see a little bit of a story here. You can't just have just random stuff. You need to have an actual story that goes from your first to your last panel. And at least 3 panels with spaces in between them. So you can have 6 panels if you want to. That's fine. I wouldn't go above 6 if I were you. If you wanna have just 3, that's okay, but you can't have 2, you can't have just 1, you need to have at least 3. So, this is this is what I want you to do. And I understand if you've never done this before, you're going to have some hiccups like I did. I understand you may have little things like this, like I do. There's a little hiccup down here too. Things get smudged, stuff happens. If you're worried that you may lose points for something like this, leave me a note when you turn this in. There's a space where you can put comments and you can tell me, I tried doing this, here's how it messed up, and that's fine. I understand. Things sometimes don't go the way you want. Just make sure that you turn in something that meets all the criteria.